We're addicted to our phones. Literally, we're addicted. We've trained ourselves to get a small release of dopamine every time our phone rewards us with a like, a message, or a new email. Most smartphone owners check their phones several times an hour. Millennials check their phones 150 times a day. Okay, maybe you think you're not addicted, but I am. And my addiction has gotten worse over the years. My smartwatch vibrates to alert me of every new message, no matter how unimportant. The problem is that I have to stay addicted because the phone is so central to my life. My last job required me to be accessible at all hours. I worked with people in almost every time zone, waking up to emails with Australia and going to bed after conference calls in California. My office was my BlackBerry, and even when I didn't have to respond immediately, well, I did. There's a great side to being mobile. I have more freedom to manage my own time. When it's snowing, I can just work from home. On a great summer day, I could sneak out of the office to sit in a park, and nobody knows whether I'm working for a desk or a blanket. But that's the problem. The addiction isn't just in how we look for likes, it's also in how we work. A growing body of psychology and management research shows that the need to be constantly online and responsive is unhealthy. We're getting more overwhelmed and stressed at work. And the research shows that the reason why isn't because of personality differences or job requirements, it's because of the working culture. Specifically, what our working culture expects from us in being constantly connected. That is, we're stressed because everyone else is stressed. It's not the emails themselves that stress us. It's the requirement that we keep checking for them. It's the anticipation of getting them. It's waiting for the ding that makes us unhealthy. Employees with more pressure to stay connected have less work-life satisfaction and higher burnout rates. And all the management research shows those extra hours of productivity we get from carrying our phones everywhere, well, they aren't productive at all. We've collectively bought into a social norm that makes everyone worse off with no practical economic benefit. It's a trap. Nobody wants to be the person who just refuses to check their phone. That's career suicide. Which is why the media around the world was excited to report that in France, employees can legally ignore work emails outside of office hours. Well, that's what the Washington Post reported. So, vive la France, le jour sans email est arrivé. Well, no, that's not quite accurate. The story is actually more interesting and more exciting. France is doing something about after-work emails, but it didn't make them illegal and it didn't give employees the right to ignore them. A nuanced change in the law played into American perceptions of the French being lazy people who stop off at a terrace to have some wine on their way home from the strike about having to work when it's great beach weather. So let me explain. Last year, the French government passed a large labor reform bill. The bill and how it got passed was actually controversial, with many protests across the country, but that's a story for another day. Out of 219 pages of law, just 3 touched on what they called adaptation of labor law in the digital age. What was insignificant in France became wild stories everywhere else, like the Washington Post. French labor law requires that companies with a lot of employees have to have regular negotiations on their working conditions. The new law added to this negotiation the requirement that they come up with an agreement about reasonable use of digital tools. It's up to employees and management to come up with their own standards on when employees are expected to be checking and replying to email or answering phone calls. It's up to them to balance the needs of a rapidly changing digital world with the right to disconnect. To be clear, there's no legal enforcement of this agreement. The police aren't going to bust into the office to drag away the guy who overuses read receipts. Nobody's going to jail for using Comic Sans when they click reply all. The boss is not getting fined for sending a cryptic text message. Instead, the law is a guideline that protects employees from punishment by letting them know when they can be a little less accessible. Urgent emails will still always be urgent. The employee who spends all weekend ignoring 50 phone calls is still going to come in on Monday to a very angry office. That hasn't changed. What's changed is a recognition that overconnected is overdependent, that is bad for employees and for companies when there's no work-life balance, that the only way out of our culture trap is to create a way to change that culture with a discussion. The French law is the beginning of that discussion. It's a discussion about how we manage our time and our responsibilities at work, especially as the digital age continues to intrude even more. It's a discussion we need, and soon, because I've got about 15 more emails to check. Hey, thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, fun, or informative, please click like or subscribe. It makes a huge difference in YouTube's algorithms.